Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Sports Parent Academy. Today we're talking about advanced strength and conditioning for young athletes as they enter the early specialization phase, around ages 13 to 15. This is a critical time for development, and the way they train now can set them up for long-term success, or if not done correctly, lead to setbacks. At this stage, we're introducing resistance training, but under the right supervision. It's all about balancing power, agility, and endurance so young athletes can grow stronger while staying safe and avoiding injury. To help us break it all down, I am beyond excited to introduce Dr. David Martin. Dr. Martin has an incredible career in elite sports science. He was the former head of the Australian Institute for Sports and served as a director of performance for the Philadelphia 76ers. He's widely regarded as one of the best sports scientists in the world, and today he's here to help us understand how parents can best support their young athletes during this stage of development. Dr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. At this stage, a lot of athletes are starting to specialize in one or two sports, and parents often wonder how to support them physically without pushing them too hard. Let's start here. What should strength and conditioning look like for a 13 to 15-year-old athlete?
I think even as little as probably 20 years ago, you would find a number of experts who would say, I don't really think that a young child should be engaged in any resistance training. They'd probably go after weightlifting and say, don't do it. But I think the research is pretty clear now that if you allow a 13-year-old to become familiar with the different types of techniques that are involved with resistance training, and these can be done with body weight or with weightlifting, that is very safe and in fact highly appropriate to allow a young 13-year-old to start to engage in resistance training as often as 2 times a week, and that would be with a more structured 20 to 30-minute program. Depending on the sport they're involved with, that might even increase to 3 to 4 days per week. You can imagine there are now 13, 14-year-olds who are involved in competitive weightlifting, Olympic-style weightlifting. They're on a fast track to the Olympic Games. And if you're going to emerge as an 18 to 21-year-old and you're going to be doing a power or strength-based sport, then you need to start becoming familiar with the resistance training routines. So I would say it's all going to be sport dependent, and it's all going to be historically dependent. And the key here is to make sure that the technique and the form that the athlete is engaged with is appropriate, and that you gradually increase them into the higher resistance training frequencies. So you'd start with 1 day a week to see how everything's going, and then you might go to 2 days a week, and then maybe 3 or 4 days a week. The training sessions can be generally short, like 15 to 20 minutes to begin with, and then they can lengthen out to 30 minutes all the way up to an hour. You're looking for signs and symptoms that the child is not adapting well. And one thing to be really careful about is creating a competitive environment in the weight room. When young children, 13-year-olds, start to see a sister or a brother or a teammate that they're very competitive with, they can start to be a little overly ambitious with their weightlifting or their resistance training, and that can lead to injury. They can also mask signs and symptoms that my knee is hurting or my ankle is hurting or my back is hurting, and they won't tell you because they want to beat the person beside them. So I always recommend, if you're going to start with resistance training, which I think is more than appropriate for a 13-year-old, that you want to do it in a safe environment with good supervision, take the competitive nature off of it, and allow the engagement to be quite individual.
You've worked with some of the most elite athletes in the world. What are some of the key performance and recovery principles that also apply to these younger athletes, even if they're not pros yet?
I think early on in my career, I've been doing this for over 30 years, I would say that for the recommendation for young, children, 8, 10-year-olds, 10 to 15-year-olds, I think that what you'd probably find is people kind of in the no pain, no gain, early specialization. You got to get the wins early, be seen, get the support, go for it. I think now we're starting to see, even in recent International Olympic Committee position statements, they're making the strong statement that it's better to diversify the engagement in sport and to try multiple different sports and to be more playful, to allow for competition to take place, but to think about modified games and lots of different activities, and that the winning and the losing can start to add to the resiliency of the athlete. And one thing we've learned from really elite athletes, I've been able to work with a Tour de France champion and an MVP in the NBA. One thing that you will learn from true champions at the highest level is that these individuals are capable of amazing resilience. They know how to handle losses, and they know how to bounce back and learn from their mistakes. And so the problem with youth is if they are at a physical advantage and they start to get into a league where they're winning all the time and they specialize and they're always the best, they're always the best, always the best, then what happens is they start to really suffer when they get their first setback. And if they're going to truly become elite, like one of the best in the world, they're going to have to handle setbacks and learning how to cope and to become resilient.
One challenge I hear a lot from parents is that their kids want to train harder, longer, and more often. But we know that can actually backfire. How can parents and coaches recognize when more is becoming too much?
It's a real problem. There have been some comments in the scientific literature that the youth of 20, 30 years ago played a lot, but they didn't compete a lot, and that they were more balanced in the way they engaged in physical activities. Today's youth are polarizing. There's a lot of children that are doing almost nothing. They're playing video games, they're sitting and they're watching TV and movies, they're doing almost nothing. And then there's a small cohort that are in some kind of specialized academy and they're doing everything. And so this polarization is giving some children almost too much and the large majority not enough. One way to take a very ambitious, motivated individual who tends to do too much and is placing all of their self-worth and all of their identity in their sport is to allow them to engage in other hobbies and to allow them to engage in other forms of activity that aren't so competitive, hiking or cross-country skiing, or you might go ice skating or swimming. Something else that is like even adventurous and engaging physically, but it's not always so competitive. The other thing that is you'll see some coaches do, because the kids will be out there and they want to shoot baskets, is the coaches will start to have days where there's more like a yoga session and some mobility, or there might be some mindfulness and some meditation, or there might be some hydrotherapy. And so although the kids are there for a 1-hour training session, 2/3 of it was really auxiliary recovery type activities, not necessarily just the sport activity. And maybe one more point that I think is really important is the evidence is pretty clear that youth today are sleep deprived. And there is so many desirable things to do from 9 o'clock until 1 in the morning. There's so much that you can do as a child. No one's telling you what to do. And so you can scroll and watch movies and talk to friends and get on games. And so what happens is they go to bed later and later. It's like me time and they love it. But they still have to wake up and they have to go to school. And so trying to build in the opportunity for an afternoon nap is a really interesting concept. Some schools are starting to have nap times in their schools. Some coaches are actually allowing for make-up sleep, where they have training sessions where you might do some light skills, but you also might just have a nap. You might go into a sleep pod and get some extra sleep. And anything that contributes to better sleep hygiene is really good, because the more you recover, the more you can train. And sometimes it's not overtraining, it's under-recovering.
This brings us to recovery. And I know this is a space you're incredibly passionate about. You've been involved in developing tools that support recovery, including a product called CoolMitt. Can you share what it is and how it can help young athletes train and recover more efficiently?
Yeah, one of the aspects of high-intensity exercise, really intense exercise, is that the body gets quite warm. And so the ability to cool the body down shortens the window from dealing with the stress of exercise into moving into the recovery phase of exercise. Once your body temperature is down, you can start going through all these adaptation processes that allow you to get stronger and more resilient. So if you finish exercise in the heat or just normal exercise, any type of an intervention that helps you cool your body a little bit quicker could be aiding in the total recovery time and the adaptation times that are afforded to you. So there are a number of interesting products, and one that I'm fairly close to is called CoolMitt, and it uses a really interesting concept that there are these blood vessels in the palm of your hand, and those blood vessels can allow for heat exchange to happen in addition to the normal ways that you sweat and radiate heat from your body. And so what CoolMitt does is it essentially allows people to put their hands on a cold surface, not ice cold because that would cause vasoconstriction, but cold enough to set up an optimal heat gradient to allow heat to dissipate from the body. And this can be used alone or in conjunction with other types of cooling, like a mist fan, or you might even have like cold towels on the back of the neck. Or one way to cool yourself is to ingest a cool beverage. And that cool beverage, if it's cold water, as it goes into your body, it has to heat up, so it acts as a heat sink. So when the young athlete goes to the toilet, they're literally moving heat out of their body. So usually most people focus on the thermoregulation side is super important. And then fuel, so trying to be able to get some carbohydrate and protein into the body within about an hour or two. A lot of athletes, especially women, something to watch out for if they're in a weight-conscious sport. Say they're a diver or a gymnast and their bodies are always on display and they may have unrealistic expectations of how thin they need to be. They will exercise really, really hard, but they won't want to eat because they will think that carbohydrates will make them fat, or they don't want to have too many calories in their diet. And it's really important to set up a fueling regimen that people feel comfortable with and that they don't avoid and skip. So to have a hard training session and then to move into a meal where there's fluid replacement and also carbohydrate and protein sources in that meal, that's ideal. To skip the meal or to feel like restricting yourself from fluid intake is somehow making you mentally tougher is not advised at all. And then again, we go back to sleep. There's lots of different things you can do. Cold water baths are really interesting. Compression boots are really interesting. Massage is always really interesting. But a lot of times what we're finding is those modalities are setting people up so they can relax. And once they're relaxed, they sleep better. So it's not just the massage, which costs money and is tricky. It's not just the hydrotherapy, which sometimes you need special facilities. It's actually finding a quiet time that settles the athlete down so that they can go to sleep at a more consistent time.
That's incredible, especially when so many young athletes are training in hot gyms and outdoor fields. So let's zoom out a little. What does a well-rounded strength and conditioning plan look like for an athlete at this stage?
The young athlete is going to start off where the men and women are very, very similar. They've neither gone through puberty. They might be 5 to 6 years old. And so you can almost train a young boy and a young girl the same way. And usually what you're doing in the early years, like 8 to 10 years old, is you're trying to make sure that they've got good technique and that the resistance training, when they're putting their muscles under some type of tension, that it's associated with play. Like you're picking things up and you're throwing things over here and you're squatting down and you're jumping and you're hopping and you're leaping and you're bounding and you're building up all the motor coordination and skills and agility. And you're doing that in ways that are also conditioning them. And you're trying to think always about pushing. The arms push out and they push up. And you can do that by throwing a ball up over like a pole, and you can then not just push, but you can pull. So you can grab some type of a small weight or a bag, like a sandbag. You can pull it up, or you can pull it in. Like you can imagine games like tug of war. So things are playful, usually more reps and lighter resistance. And with the lower body, you're hinging at the waist, like picking things up, and you're also squatting, single leg and double leg. all of that ties into play. As you move from 10 to kind of 14, you'll see that women will tend to mature earlier than men. And sometimes as they go through menarche, leading up to their first period, and the women start to change and mature, you'll start to see that some sports will start to put more emphasis on control around the ankles and the knees and the hips. Women tend to have a higher susceptibility to having like ACL ruptures, like some of the ligaments in the knees. So you'll start to see a little bit of resistance training specialization. And then as they get older, you'll see that the boys turning into men, they'll start to handle higher training volumes, and they usually adapt to those to a greater extent. So the question's a good one. What's good? Like, what's kind of a rule of thumb? I would usually say if you are loading up some type of pushing and some type of pulling, and you can do 2 exercises, and the reps can be anywhere from like 15 to 20, and you're also doing some kind of hinging where you're bending down like a deadlift, some type of lifting activity, some type of squatting activity. It can be 2 legs or single legs, like with a lunge. And then a little bit of work through the core. Could be sit-ups, but planks and isometrics tend to be super, super safe. If you can do something like that, 2 sets of these 2 exercises of that 10 to 15 kind of reps, maybe up to 20, and you do that 2 days a week, you've got yourself a really nice, strong, young individual who's capable of taking the next step when their sport takes them to higher levels of competition.
And what would you say to a parent who's worried their child has fallen behind because they haven't started serious strength training yet?
Well, I would tell them that there are individuals who are in their 60s who have not done a lot of resistance training, and that once they start with a good trainer, as long as they don't get hurt and they don't overdo it and get overly tired, if they can find a dose of resistance training that they can maintain and be consistent with, the human body will adapt in a very, very profound way. If somebody feels like they're falling behind, you need to think about falling behind in what? Are you falling behind in life, or are you falling behind in one particular position in one particular sport? A lot of the ideas behind sampling different sports, I've seen individuals who are not very good hill climbers as a cyclist. They can't get up a hill, so they're out with a group and they're just falling behind. But when they get onto a bicycle in a time trial position on the flats, they're one of the best time trialists in the world. So there's so much fun to be had in different types of sport. And if you feel like you're falling behind, one, because your training programs and regimens aren't structured enough and consistent enough, then start thinking of other ways to play. Some people like dance. Some people like weights. Some people like to get out like almost in a boot camp scenario with a bunch of kids all doing circuits together, and they have a whole bunch of fun with it. The key is to just keep being versatile. If you love the water, try the water. If you don't like the water, then go try stuff with balls and team sports. It's about trying to take the thought of a very limited view of saying, I'm falling behind, I'm losing, and shift it more into really thinking about just what you're experiencing. The human body thrives when it's engaged in consistent physical activity. And so if you feel like you're falling behind in one area, maybe don't bang your head up against a brick wall. Think of other alternate sports and alternate programs and alternate ways to get your body moving.
Before we wrap up, what's one piece of advice you want every parent of a young, driven athlete to walk away with?
I have to say 2. I have to say sample as much as you can. Sample all that sport has to offer. There's so much fun to be had out there. Structured and unstructured. Sport is essentially organized play. So one, sample. All the way up, age 14, 15. Even Federer was doing lots of different sports, before he specialized in tennis. And even when you're a specialist, still try to add some fun things in on the side. And then the other thing is to realize as a young athlete that I love this Professor Carol Dweck, who talks about the power of yet, and she has a really nice presentation that's on a TED Talk, but she's published some great papers. And the idea is that there will be times in your life where you're not ready yet. But don't think about that as an absolute devastating blow to say you'll never be any good. Young kids are like young plants. You have no idea what they're going to turn into. You have no idea. It might be a tree, might be a flower. It's just popped out of the soil and you don't have any idea where it might go to. So if somebody's cutting you from a team, or if somebody's not putting you in as a starter, or if somebody doesn't think like your skill sets are adapting, and so they say you're not invited to this camp or you're not put on this team, that can be devastating if you're outcomes based. But if you're process based and you understand that it's teaching about resilience and you might just not be ready yet.
Dr. Martin, thank you so much. Your experience and insight are invaluable. And I know this conversation will help so many parents better understand how to support their athletes. And parents, if you want to learn more about CoolMitt or dive deeper into performance and recovery science, be sure to check out the additional resources linked below. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin, and thank you to everyone for joining us. As parents, our role is to support and guide our kids through this stage, helping them build strength safely, train with purpose, and most importantly, enjoy the journey. We'll see you next time.